Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Roy Wilsher, welcome to the Firefighters Podcast. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Thank you for taking time out of your incredibly busy day to be sitting down with us. I know it's a fairly eventful day down in the world of London today. You've just moved into some new offices as well.
Yes, we have. Yeah, we've just moved around the corner from people may know the offices in Globe House around the back of Victoria. Yeah. We've now moved to sort of the front of Victoria and to Clive House.
Because this whole, the move isn't anything to do with its infancy, but the HMI in itself is. It's still kind of its infancy. Zoe was your predecessor, wasn't it? Was she the first in that role? I'm probably going to let myself down here.
Well, it's interesting.
Give us a whistle-stop tour of the background on that.
We talk about inspectorate. So as a inspector at the Constabulary, and I won't get the exact dates, HMIC has been around for about 156, 160 years. So it's been around right from the start of policing. There used to be a fire inspectorate, which was done away with back in 2005 with the Fire Services Act. Okay. And in 2018, following Theresa May as Home Secretary's reforms, one of which was we needed standards. So you've now got a Fire Standards Board. Another one was transparency, and another one was inspection. So after that, in 2017, HMIC became HMIC-FRS, and Sir Tom Windsor became the chief HMI for fire and the first inspection started in 2018, and Zoe Billingham was the SRO for fire.
Today's episode was once again brought to you by William Wood Watches. With the tagline, once forgotten, now reborn, every single watch has 100 years of firefighting history in it. They take an original Merryweather brass firefighter's helmet worn by firefighters in Britain in the 1920s and melt it inside every single William Wood watch. All of the craftsmanship is carried out in the heart of London, and they are proud to lock in the legacy of the brave firefighting heroes in every single timepiece. I think one of my favourite things about these watches is the fire hose straps. Now, these have gone from landfill to effectively luxury now. They receive fire hose from a massive amount of fire services from all around the world, which has come to the end of its life. The majority of the fire hose around the world is unfortunately ends in landfill usually. They clean the hose, repurpose it, and sew it into the luxury watch straps themselves. I always wear the red one, but when you get your watch, it comes with a series of different ones you can get. You can explore the full range of upcycled straps on their website, and you can see the link in the episode notes. If you head over to their website, you'll be able to check out the Jubilee, the Triumph, the Valiant, the Bronze, and the Chivalrous. All of those watches are available right there, and you can spread the cost of these over 3 to 6 months interest free. So for the pulse of the fire service right there on your wrist, head over to williamwoodwatches.com and take a look. Your sheer ability, and I'm sure you've had to say that 100 times, so it kind of rolls off the tongue, but I've moved into a new role in the job that I work in, and I always think about this capacity of knowledge like a plate of food, like it gets capacity. You must have been able to develop the ability to just assimilate and disseminate knowledge at such a rapid pace to be able to do what you do. You must get bombarded with it non-stop.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, one of, we have areas of improvement, but one of my strengths is the ability to take on information and distill it. You used to do the old exams where here's 2 pages, 4-page information, distill it to a paragraph. Yeah.
Or even when you sit down in a lot of emergency services now and you listen to the audio track or something, someone bombards you with information and go, what's the pertinent pieces out of that?
Yes,
you think that's something...
Yeah, you need to pick out, and especially when you're looking... So when I took on this role, other HMIs, other inspectors previous said you're a bit like a judge. You're presented with lots of evidence, and you need to distill that evidence into a grade and pick out the pertinent points and the important points of that evidence.
Have you always had a skill for that? I mean, rewind, take us all the way back. Where did you grow up? What was your sort of upbringing?
North London was my upbringing.
So you've always been in London?
I've always been. I was telling someone earlier. I live now about a mile from where I was born. So in Barnet, in North London. I grew up in an area called Arna's Grove, which is, if you look on the Piccadilly line, you'll see Arna's Grove Tube. Okay. I grew up just near there.
Any siblings? What did your parents do?
Parents, mum was a sort of bookkeeper, never an accountant, a bookkeeper for most of her life. And she worked until she was 75 as a bookkeeper for a golf club. So,
did you use the type test? They have to use a number of words, because my mum started as like a bookkeeper and then moved into banking and things like that.
Yeah, I think, and the days I grew up in, a lot of women did typing tests and the exams back then. So she did the same. And it was women at that time rather than anyone else, because you didn't have the diversity of opportunity back in the 60s, did you? So,
without giving away your age, what sort of time was this? In the 70s, 80s?
I don't mind. I will be 60 in March. So,
60?
Yeah.
Crikey.
So I don't mind.
You're looking fit and well for a brother. What was it like growing up back then? In London itself, because it was a very different place. We had someone from London, Steve Dudney, who did some 30-something years in LFB, and he was saying how different it was back then, and how society was just very. He said it actually felt like it was closer back then, even though people say how dangerous it was and stuff like that. There was very much more of a neighbourly feel to the world, and we're kind of like a global village now. But people have never felt more alone than they have now, which is kind of weird, even though we're so connected.
It does, and I think one of the it's always one of the interesting things where people from other parts of the country don't think that people in London talk to each other or smile or look after it. That's nonsense. You do. It's just on the tube we don't do that, because you're all busy getting to work. But everywhere else you do. So it was fine. London, I went to a meeting at Canary Wharf last week, and I thought to myself, when I joined the fire service, none of this was here. Canary Wharf, Docklands Light Railway, all that Excel Centre, it didn't exist in the early 80s when I joined the fire service. So, and I think that's a big thing about London. Another area people might know in London, Borough Market, which is just down the road from London Fire Brigade's old training centre. We were told not to go there at night because it was too dangerous, because there's too many drugs, gangs, that sort of thing. So don't go there at night when you were training. But now it's a very fashionable food market.
Speaking to Danny Cotton, and she gave a story of, I don't know what area it was, and it doesn't particularly matter, but she says that they were specifically told not to go down certain areas because people would set fires and they were pushing fridges off balconies.
I had that. Broadwater Farm Estate, which is where PC...
What the heck?
Yeah, PC Blakelock was killed, if you remember, in 1985. I used to serve at Hornsey in Tottenham, and there... You never got off the machine without your helmet on. You never went in less than 3 people. You had to look up at the balconies because things would be thrown at you. So it was a bit of a different place back then.
Where did that kind of... I know we're kind of going straight down a rabbit hole here, but just give me a whistle stop. Where did that kind of come from? Was it just a disliking for public service? Or was
it's establishment, a disliking for establishment, and the fire service was seen as part of the establishment.
I romantically thought that people always like the fire. I mean, that's probably only since I've been around, and I've come from more of a rural background, not obviously in London, so...
Yeah, I think it's a lot different now in London. You don't get many attacks, but there are places in the country, so South Shields, Moss Side, parts of West, especially around fireworks night, that sort of thing, where firefighters get attacked deliberately.
Yeah.
I don't see that in London so much now.
No. So you joined in 81?
Yes. What
made you want to join? What did you do before it? How did you get into it, really?
By chance.
Okay.
By
Somebody like yourself, I'd expect you had some sort of strategic plan into getting in.
I was toying. I did A-levels at my North London Comprehensive, and I thought my A-level results were awful. Apparently they were the best the school had ever had.
Okay.
Which was
the bar set low, or did you actually do all right?
Oh no, they were poor A-levels. But, but I was going off to be a teacher. I was going to be a history teacher, history and PE, and I was going to Portsmouth Polytechnic.
History?
Yeah. I'm a real history buff.
Yeah,
especially the Middle Ages, Anglo-Saxon, Viking type, but any history really I like.
So that was the initial intention?
Yeah, that was the initial intention.
When did that go off the rails?
My best friend at the time went off and joined the Prince and was earning money. He was 18 and earning good money.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to go to Polytechnic for 3 years and be poor. Yeah. I'm not sure whether I want to do that still. And at that time when I was thinking that, and forgive me because it was what it was at the time, I saw a advert say, become a London fireman. And that's what the advert was.
Yeah,
and I looked at it, that looks interesting, I might give that a go.
What was it about it you thought was interesting?
Well,
what did you think in your mind a firefighter or a fireman was back then? We all have an image of it, don't we?
Yeah, well, I wanted to do something that wasn't particularly sat in an office. I wanted, like teaching. I didn't want to sit in the office but there wasn't many computers around there, but working in an office. I wanted something that was fairly active. I'd always done sport and played football and those sorts of things. So it just appealed, and the wages didn't look too bad either.
What was it like when you first got into the job? Give us a whistle stop of training. So what was it like?
Well, I trained on escape ladders and hook ladders.
Hook ladders.
Yes,
Wow.
I trained on hook ladders, and one of the scariest moments of my training is we used to do this drill where you hook ladder to the 7th floor of the tower. And were told, you stood there to attention, no safety harness, no belts, nothing to hold on to, stood to attention and was told to try and tell the time by Big Ben. But you couldn't actually see Big Ben from that tower, so it was something you were looking to see. And then you did something called a parapet mount, which is where you lean forward to the top of the ladder, 7 stories up, and then swing your body out onto the ladder. And my knees were shaking when I did that. Because literally,
we still see that a little bit. I've seen some Americans doing it where they get out of first floor windows by underhooking their arm. Is that the one you're on about? And you spin your body round onto the ladder?
Yeah, well, this is more you held what was the horns, the tops of the 2 strings, as they were called, and then you swung your leg out and hooked it onto. But if you had slipped, that was it. Really, I
remember they used to have a drill where we would put the aero ladder platform at full vertical and you climb all the way to the top, climb over it and climb down the other side. And as you'll know in London far better than I will, the wind when you're getting up even 4 or 5 stories is petrifying. And now you look back and you just, I mean, yours was significantly long before mine, but you just think, wow. Is there an argument as well though for character that would have built? I mean, it was preposterously dangerous and things like that, but because people moan about culture and people moan about all these sort of, and culture is something I did note down I'd love to ask you about, but is there an argument for tough times build tough people, or is that me being romantic again?
I think my version of tough times build tough is realistic training.
Okay.
So when I was chief of Hertfordshire, anyone interested in joining, we used to take them up to the tower, say, look over there, are you scared of heights? Take them into a dark area, do you get claustrophobic? So those very basic things before you even put them through any of the other tests to come in.
Yeah.
Because
it's a bit too late back then. Sometimes it astonishes me. I've seen a couple of services who will go through the full training PPE, which is quite a financial onboarding, and then find out something silly, like a couple of services that hadn't tested for driving licenses recently and stuff like that, and you just go, crikey, folks, we're missing this one here. So when you joined in 1981, and as I was looking through your records, you kind of flew through the ranks with the greatest of respect, and I'm sure through your own sort of achievements. But how soon did you become the senior divisional officer? That was one of the first roles that sort of stood out to me when I was looking back at
that was 98. So it was 17 years.
So you had 17 years.
Yeah.
What was the toughest one between them? Because some people always say firefighter to sort of lead in hand, or crew commander, or whatever the terminology is across the UK Fire and Rescue Services.
My toughest move, I remember, is when I was promoted to leading firefighter, I think we started calling them by then, in November 87 at Holloway. So it was only the next station along from Hornsey. But my watch at Hornsey was so good. It was so much fun, and I loved the people, and we did sport, and we went out and all the things that you do with a good watch. And we did our jobs, we trained and we drilled and all that sort of thing. And that was my toughest move, because I went to Holloway, I was 23, and I was the next youngest person was 30, and the watch had been together forever. And I was the
So how long were you on that first watch for?
The first watch, I went there in April '82, so it was 5 years or so.
5 years. Because I've moved around like every 2 or 3 years, maybe because I get impatient, but also like I get fascinated by everything, and I want to go and learn from the expert, learn from the next people. But also worry for people that stay somewhere for too long. You've had a habit, intentionally or otherwise, of moving through different roles. Where does your mind sit in that aspect of not getting complacent, that whole continuous personal development thing, how long people should or shouldn't? Because some people we need people to stay firefighters forever, and they can laterally develop for their entire career. They haven't got to go vertically at all. But you had that itch constantly by the looks of things.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things there. I think, yes, there is nothing wrong with being a professional firefighter for your whole career. Nothing wrong with that at all. And there's plenty of things to develop. I do worry when you hear someone's retired after 30 years on White Watch Ilford. And that's all they've seen. Is
I feel like they've read the same page of a massive book. They've just read the same page again and again and again. And I just think, you've got a small perspective of what you must believe the fire and rescue service to be, surely.
And not only that, we talk about watches being like families, but how many dysfunctional families do you know? Not every family's a happy family.
No. I always felt as a watch commander, my job was to, this is going to sound really bad, I don't mind, because I consider myself a bit of a freak. I think everybody in the fire service is a little bit crazy, a little bit kooky, but you've got to protect those people because they are what make the watches so strong. The person that's insanely passionate about this, or is a little bit out there, but is great at community safety, is great at engaging with kids because they're a little bit strange. You know what I mean? And your job is to protect those people and keep the family strong, because we all need that silly, funny sister, brother, cousin, and that's kind of what I see when I see a watch family.
Yeah, well, that as well, but I think everyone needs to be able to be their true self at work, and I'm not sure in today's fire service everyone can.
Mate, that's kind of the whole reason I started the podcast. I felt like I couldn't take all of myself to work, and I was like, how can I bring more of me to work? Because we need to be careful what we say and all that sort of stuff, but we're suffocating so much of who we are, and we become this homogenous, everybody's the same, no one's got a personality, no one expresses their uniqueness and their diverse backgrounds and the things they've done and all that sort of stuff. I think like you say, it's a dangerous place to go to if we're not careful. I think we are unstitching that though, and some of the stuff.
I think it's getting better, but I happened to go to the opera on Saturday night. My wife went to see Madame Butterfly, and I do wonder whether every white male firefighter could go onto their watch on Monday morning and said, "I went to see Madame Butterfly Saturday night." What would the reaction be? It might be perfectly fine. But I'm not convinced it would be everywhere.
No, I think it sounds harsh, but again, when people like me can say things like that, because me and my daughters love going to see the theatre and stuff like that, and it's okay when I do it because I'm a 19 stone, white male firefighter, so it's kind of like nobody says anything, or they all kind of laugh and a joke. But if someone else says it, if the young girl or guy who's just in says it, like you say, where do you think banter? What was banter like? We used the word banter, it can be a really dangerous word. What was it like? What was the culture like when you joined? Because we hear the horror stories sometimes, but I feel they're few and far between now.
Banter was fine. There was some poor things when I joined the fire service. They still had secret bars on stations. So I went at my first. I was remembering the other day because the 40 years of the Falklands War. I was on duty the night the Sheffield was sunk. That's how long I've been in the fire service. So. But I can remember going to my first night duty, apart from the food fight that happened and water fight and all those. I think that was for my benefit as a new person on the watch. But then the barrel of beer came out, and you knew who the driver was because they only had 2 pints.
Obviously.
And I can remember I was 19 by the time I went to the watch, and they said, "Oh, do you want to?" I said, "No, I don't. I've just come to work." Was it
like a double take? Were you like, "Is this?"
Yeah, I did. And I remember going. One of my first bit of acting up as a LF crew commander was at Tottenham Fire Station, 8 o'clock, and I was on duty the night of the Heysel Stadium tragedy. I can remember that happening again when on duty, and about 8 o'clock, everyone disappeared. The whole watch I was doing some office. Well, where have they all gone? I walked round and round the station, went up to the locker room, which was upstairs, and I noticed this door at the back of the locker room. I opened it, and there was a full disco, optics, women, and lights, and I shut the door and walked away again. I thought, what is going on? And the station officer was behind the bar, serving.
And I know in
Thank
that
Christ
example,
that's all stopped.
Yeah, exactly. I know it was something I was going to bring up later, but it's a good point for it. How do you, and I don't know, actually I was about to say it's easier now. The question is, how do you handle difficult conversations? Because you must have had, not because you're a difficult person, I don't know you, but I'm sure you've had to have a lot in your time, because we all need to feel that conviction to be able to challenge where appropriate. But I feel like that's the one time you actually are enacting the majority of what we are trying to get our leaders to do. 364 days a year is not why you're getting paid. You're getting paid to challenge the behaviour when it happens. But so many people really struggle with that. We avoid uncomfortable conversations, and societies and cultures and families and watches deteriorate because of it. How have you ever done that? Have you know? You haven't obviously given any names, but
no. But I think you get better the more you do, because you also have to try and understand the person you're talking to. So some people, it can be a very straight conversation. Some people you need to work your way into it. Some people, some of the best ideas from people is when you make them think it's their idea. So it's the best way of doing it. But I tell you, this sounds a bit trite, but a small story. I was a station officer at Soho Fire Station for a while, the watch there, and they all stayed up between days somewhere because they all live a long way away, and so they always used to go out for a drink of beer between days. So after the first day, so I went out with them, but I would go out and I would have 2 pints of beer, then I would leave. And one of them said to me, "Why don't you stay for the whole night?" I said, "Because I'm, I like you, but I'm not your mate. I'm your boss. I'm your station officer. Yeah. So if I stay there drinking with you all night, getting drunk, how am I going to tell you the next day you're not doing your job properly?" So I kept that little bit of distance.
And people really struggle with that, especially in that first step, like you alluded to as a group commander. And I think it's terrible if they ever do it on the same watch. When people get promoted on the same watch from a firefighter. Yes. No, I've never seen that work very well. Yeah,
and I think being a watch commander, station officer, as it was back in the day, is one of the hardest roles, ranks, because you are with people all day and all night, and keeping a bit of a distance and becoming the leader manager rather than everyone's mate is quite a difficult thing to do. So.
In your head, what is the difference between leading and managing? Is there a distinction at all?
Managing to me is paperwork and keeping all the CPD and everything up to date, and
so resources, processes.
That's okay. Managing. Leadership is leading by example sometimes, but I've always been an advocate of servant leadership. So you're there to serve the people you're leading, not just say, "Look at me, I am the leader, you do this." It's about helping people improve through your leadership.
Better articulated than me when I tried to say, about protecting people. You're supposed to be the catcher of the boulders as they fall down, and don't just step out of the way and go, "Oh, well, just let it land on their head." Now, you became one of many things, but you moved into being a chartered engineer in 2000 and then went on to a project lead for the restructuring of London Fire Brigade in 2001. That sounds like a colossal project. Restructuring of the largest fire and rescue service, or brigade, in the UK. What made you even want to go for that? That sounds.
I was asked to do it.
Okay. Yeah. I've got an opportunity for you, Roy.
Yeah, it's a development opportunity. Okay. Go and lead this project.
What was it? How was it pitched to you?
Well, it was fascinating. So I had been Brian Robinson's staff officer for a little while, but only for about a year, because when it's a story I've told lots of people, so I'll tell it now. When I first sat in front of him, he said to me, "My last staff officer used to polish the buttons of my uniform," and I said to him, "Did he?"
And that must have been nice for you.
That was it. Well, that was the end of that conversation. And when he let me go, he said, "We both know you're not a staff officer." So, so I said, "Yeah, fine." But I must have done okay, because a couple of years later they asked me to lead the project to restructure the
What did it
brigade.
actually entail? Because that just sounds like a colossal task.
At that time, I've left London a long time ago. London Fire Brigade was 3 commands. It'd been 11 divisions, 5 areas, 3 commands with an ACO in charge, and they wanted a better way of getting closer to the community. So my restructure took it from 3 commands to 32 boroughs in the City of London. So each, depending on the size of the borough, would have a group commander in charge, or a borough commander as we called them. Okay. Now, I linked things, so I was helping train the first group of borough commanders when 9/11 happened. All these things, I'm sort of on duty doing things, but all these things in history seemed to happen. So we was in the Hampton House, a tall building in central London, when 9/11 happened, when we were training the first set of borough commanders to take over.
So when you're training people like that, what are the areas you look for? What are the strengths that you look for in a broker? Because it's a big span of control.
Yeah,
not as much so as people you and above yourself then had to try and deal with, but nonetheless, it's a big step for people.
Yeah, so the people have been, divisional officers as they were at the time, group commander ops or group commanders fire safety, so they got that level of understanding and leadership and management. But this was about, right, this is now your borough, you have a protection resource, a prevention resource, you have the stations, you need to look at performance, you need to lead, you need to make sure you're linked into the communities, so it's all those type of things, and then working up into a single assistant chief as it was at the time. So.
What did leadership development look like back then? Because I know there is some good processes in place now. I mean, NFCC are doing some stuff. I know the fire standards have got different aspects of leadership development woven within them as well. Was there any formal development for leaders? Was the courses that people could go
at a
on?
fire service college. So yeah. I didn't do the junior officers development because I got promoted too quickly. But then I did junior officer advancement, divisional command course and brigade command course. And I also did the fire engineering degree. So it was progression training, and they still had exams at the time. So you had to pass exams to become a station officer. And
how much of those involved soft skills? Because when we talk about engineering and strict exams and qualifications, they are more hard skills, more things you can measure because it's a pass-fail degree qualification. But the soft skills, I would say the soft skills are the hard skills because they're the things that people can actually rise to a level and still have a massive blind spot and baffled why they can't seem to connect very well or build rapport.
There was some, but probably not enough. So there's presentation skills, talking to people skills, performance management type things. But I've never done the executive leadership program, but I expect it does more soft skills dealing with people than the divisional command or brigade command course did.
Did you ever have any mentors or things? Because people talk about mentors, sponsors, coaches. Did you ever seek any of that? Do you ever have one? Did you ever give them one? Did you find one yourself?
Not formally, but I always learnt from people. I used to. So that reading skill, that assimilation skill, Brian Robson again, he always used to impress me that his prep for some meetings, and big meetings used to be in the lift on the way up to the meeting. He'd flick through the paper, say, they're the signing points, I'll ask it about that and that and that. And went into and it looked like he'd known everything that had been written because he picked out a few salient points.
That's exactly what you said at the beginning of the conversation, is knowing those touch points.
And there was a chap called Colin Johnson, who was a division officer grade 1 when I was a DO Ops, Group Commander Ops, and the way he dealt with people was he was a bit like yourself. He was a big bloke, but rugby player. He used to play for Bishop Stortford, and but the way he dealt with people was fantastic. He always had empathy. You could always see things from someone else's point of view. So I learnt things from people rather than having a single mentor, I think.
You said you had you were interested in the sport as a child. And you alluded to it again there about this individual had a rugby background and stuff like that. I always think that any kind of sport, team sports especially, do teach us a lot of these skills, kind of non-intentionally, but the ability to get people around a selective goal or collective goal. The ability to build rapport with people, the resilience, those character traits. Did you take much of that from sport? What sports did you do as a child?
Football mainly. So I mean, I used to play cricket, but I was a social cricketer. I wasn't very good, but it was a good crack on a Saturday and Sunday afternoon when you was. I still play five-a-side football. So
wow, okay.
I played my last game of 11-side football when I was 52. And I tore my hamstring. And
I was about to say, any injuries or like that?
Yeah, I really badly tore my hamstring. Playing for Hertfordshire Vets versus Greater Manchester Vets in a cup game. And
when was it you moved to Hertfordshire? 2004?
Yes.
You moved to Hertfordshire. Mm-hmm. Why the move?
I won't go into it too much. There was a couple of things that happened in London at the time that I wasn't particularly happy with. But I'd gone to. So I lived in Hertfordshire for a while. I live on the borders of Hertfordshire now anyway, so I knew Hertfordshire fairly well. And I went to Hertfordshire when they ran a IFE conference, and it struck me as a really good fire and rescue service. It was. So I always thought, I used to think my dream job would be Chief of Hertfordshire.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a minute ago, when did that idea of Chief Fire, did you ever, obviously there was something clicked at some point and thought, yeah, you know what, I think I can do that. Because when you start from a firefighter, it's a million miles away.
Yeah, I'd never had a career plan. When I joined the fire service, I didn't know there was anything apart from the fire station and fire engines.
Yeah.
Then suddenly all this thing around it turned up. Well, what do they do? So I think throughout my career, it was more, especially early parts of my career. Maybe when I got to SDO level, I thought I might be able to get there. But
I think once you move past that point, you kind of need to go for it or not, don't you, to an extent?
Yeah, so up to then, it was more, well, I've sort of done this job. I think I've mastered this job. What's next? So.
When you say that, when you think you've mastered something, because when I was down at Women in the Fire Service recently, and they were talking about, and I don't know if it's more prevalent among that sort of community, but this kind of imposter syndrome and not feeling ready for it. And one of the things a few of the chief fire officers did say is you'll never feel ready for the promotion fully, because it's like the irony of getting interviewed for a job and they ask you questions about the job and you're like, but I don't do the job yet, so I don't know.
No, yes. Yeah.
I'm not going to know until I do the job. I do the job, you train me, I'll know. Did you feel ready for these things? Did you not complacent, but did you become lack of stimulation in the jobs you were doing? Because you continue to chase that, and even now, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons I'm in this role. I wasn't ready, even after 4 years of chairing NFCC, I wasn't ready to go into consultancy or do nothing. I was still ready for another full-time job, and this is definitely a full-time job.
Where does that come from? Because that must be a difficult thing. I've no means achieved the things that you've done. I've done several businesses outside of the service and things like that, and it is quite, feedback from my wife is that it's an exhaustive energy to be around sometimes, and I find it hard to stop myself being involved in things and wanting to feel that sense of progress. Does that echo in anything? Are you good at relaxing, or because, like you say, you're not ready for retirement, you're not ready for consultancy, you like to feel you're making a difference with something? I'm guessing. Where does that come from? And has there ever been a dark side? Not a dark side, but has there ever been the other side of the coin? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's just the way I've always been, the way that I work. It's the way I am. I mean, my wife is very similar. We've just passed our 36th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
So very similar. She's still working hard. She's at a conference in Birmingham at the moment, actually. So, she's still working hard. It's just always. I can also remember back when I first joined the fire service. Going sick was a sort of it's your turn to go sick type thing.
Yes,
and which I did a couple of times because it was as a young firefighter, and then I never did it again. I just thought this is wrong. I'm ringing in with sickness and diarrhea, and I was told to, and I haven't got it, and you shouldn't do it. So I never did it again.
So you quickly broke away from that desire to fit in, really?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I've never felt the need to go with the crowd.
How? Because so many people do. I don't necessarily feel it, but I think most people in my shoes would feel a little bit lonely at times. You spend a lot of time going off and doing your own thing.
And I think my nickname as station officer at Soho was Mr. Glum, because I used to stop tourists going down the pole because the firefighters had brought them in to show them. And I said, "What are you doing? This is a place of work. Get off." And when they used to hate us. This is not a social club. This is a place of work. Plus,
it's funny until they break their ankle. Then it's not funny
absolutely.
anymore.
And who's going to get the blame?
Exactly.
Me as a station.
I can't
not
see
them,
that.
Be me as a station officer.
I see that. I've got to do something about it, guys. You can't be doing that.
But the one of the things that I've often said and whether people listen to me, you don't come to work to be liked. It's a byproduct. If it's respected is good, understood is good, but you don't come to work to be liked. You come to work to do your job.
So you were only at the deputy level for about a year until the chief's position either obviously became available until you moved into it. What did it feel like moving into that role? Because I was looking recently, and there's a couple of chief fire officer roles in the UK that they can't fill at the minute. I don't know what brigades in it. It doesn't really matter, but is it? We're in London today. One of the leaders of our country has obviously stepped away from their role. Positions like that, not that they're the same, but they must be difficult things. Is there a poison chalice aspect to it? Is it as good as it feels? There's no way up from there. Is there?
It's the thing you find about being a chief is the buck stops here. There is no one else to turn around to and say,
I'm just waiting for them to do this.
And being a chief is also challenging, fantastic job. But being a chief of anything at the moment is difficult. Whether that's a chief constable, chief fire officer, the head of children's services, the head of adult care services, the chief executive of NHS Trust. It's a difficult thing because you're under so much scrutiny nowadays, so much public scrutiny, so much Twitter scrutiny, so much scrutiny from all angles. Then all the pension effects and all the pension changes over the years, it costs you financially sometimes as well, and you get it from all sides. You can get it from unions, you can get it from staff, you can get it from fire authority, you can get it from, so it can be but it's also very rewarding.
How is it rewarding?
Because you can achieve things.
Okay.
Yeah, you can achieve things, and you can. And people work with me in Hertfordshire over a number. I had 3 deputies in my time there. It will tell you that I was always after continuous improvement. Okay, we've done that, we're doing okay, but what's next? What's the next improvement? How can we improve that? What we've done already? Always. But one of the tips I did there as well is because things are hard, and we had Harrow Court and Paul Manahan, who died on the A1M, and we had Buncefield, and we had a local strike in 2006. So there was lots of hard stuff going on as well. And as a chief, you hear 100% of the bad news and about 5% of the good news. That's what happens. So I used to start my management meetings, board meetings, by everyone had to tell me a good news story from their area.
Nice.
Right. Tell me something good that's happened in the last week in your area, in ops, in fire stations, in prevention, in protection, in finance, and everyone had to come and tell a good news story to start the meeting before we got into the papers.
Yeah, I like that. That's something we should probably think about. I was looking up until you moved into, so in 2013 you became the Chief Executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner in Hertfordshire.
Yes.
For people who are unfamiliar, and I'll include myself in that group, what's the difference when you move into a Police and Fire Commissioner role? Because that was a newer style thing. I know that it wasn't the first in the UK by far, but...
Well, I think probably... to clarify for people, I was still the chief fire officer, and I was the chief executive for the PCC. I was a director for community protection, and I was the director for ops for CFAR before NFCC came along, all at the same time.
Okay.
So yeah, but I'd been the chief by then for, I can't remember, was it 2013? So 8 years or whatever. So it's sort of budget rounds, things used to take you 2 days to do would now take 2 hours to do because you knew what to do, so you had more time. And I was asked by the PCC, because he used to be, so Hertfordshire's a county council service, he used to be the portfolio holder for fire when Buncefield and the local strikes happened, so we'd worked together a lot in the past. Okay. So when he lost his chief executive, he asked, it's funny how it happened, so he said to me, would you consider coming and doing it part-time at the same time? I said, well, that sounds interesting, different role, I'll think about it. That afternoon, the leader of the county council said, I hear you're going off to be the part-time chief exec, are you? Am I? Oh, okay, that's decided then, is it? Yeah, so the chief, so that's very much about running the PCC's office, helping with performance management of the chief constable, which was a political tightrope a little bit because I was a chief officer, responsible for the performance management process of the chief constable.
That's what I'm saying, because that, as much as people and processes are very similar from service, and we're seeing that now with people coming in at direct entry and things like that, so there's lots of crossover skills. Was there any apprehension, or was there any thought of, this is a completely unknown for me, how much do I know about the police and crimes?
No, because policing, my role wasn't policing.
Yeah.
I didn't have to be a police officer or run a police force. My role was about making sure the PCC had what he needed and his office was functioning properly and linked into the police properly in terms of finance and performance management and all those sorts of things. So it was a bit of a leadership role as a chief executive, but more of a management role at that time. So.
When did you see that was no longer fulfilling you, or you had that itch began again? Because that then continued to grow into where we are today, because I know you went into a number of different roles after that, but that was probably your first taste into the wider sense of an emergency services and how the structural aspects work.
Well, so at the same time, I had taken on chair of Jessup, Joint Emergencies.
Because you alluded to 9/11 there. So were you in London? Sorry, just to jump back. You obviously would have been there when New Dimensions projects and things came around, and the start of USAR, and then what followed on to do all of the Joint Emergency Services working groups and things like that.
Yeah. So if you remember when, well, you might not remember when Buncefield happened in 2005, high volume pumps had gone out to services but weren't on the run yet. People were still being trained on them. So we were the first big proper job to use high volume pumps.
Okay.
So we used all the tactical advisors and the national training team to run the high volume pumps at Buncefield. So they weren't on the run yet. It was the first time they got used at Buncefield. So very much linked into that. So and after Buncefield, I took on the command and control lead role for Chief Fire Officers Association, eventually becoming the Director of Operations for CFOA.
What work had you done with CFOA before that? Because obviously I imagine all chiefs will have an input of some
they do. One of the things I tried to do in Hertfordshire with my principal officers was make sure they all had a national portfolio of some kind. They did something nationally because it was Hertfordshire but we got a lot back into Hertfordshire as well from their those national roles. They learnt a lot from other services by doing a national role.
Oh, so would they get seconded? Because this is a complete unknown for me. So just expand.
No, they would do it on top of their day job. So
Okay.
our Director of Seafire Operations was on top of my day job. It's a voluntary position.
How much time would that take?
Probably a day a week, I'd say.
Really?
Yeah.
So it is quite labour intensive as well still.
Mm-hmm.
What structure do you see things like CFOA and NFCC? Because we have people listening from all levels of the emergency services. Some of these mnemonics will be entirely new to people. But let's just focus on where we are now in terms of the structure of where HMI, CFOA, NFCC, where does all that sit in terms of how fire services feed into, and fire standards boards and things like that, feed into the day-to-day roles of how we do what we do?
Okay, so I think National Fire Chiefs Council, NFCC, is important first. So I've been on the board of CFOA for 6 years, and we were having this constant discussion about whether a part-time president who was also running a fire service was enough for all the things. So if you remember back in 2005, 2006, so exams were scrapped, progression training at the Fire Service College was scrapped, eventually the Fire Service College was sold off, the inspectorate was cancelled, there was lots of babies thrown out of lots of bath orders in the name of localism and those sorts of things. So no standards being produced, no operational guidance was produced for 2 years until Ken Knight as CFOA tried to build that up, and then eventually CFOA, then NFCC, took that on and became National Operational Guidance. So
we were kind of lost in the fog for a little bit though, weren't
we?
We got rid of a lot of stuff without having anything to replace it.
Yeah, so CFOA was trying hard to do a national role, but didn't. So we were having a lot of discussions about we really need at least a full-time president and some resources. So which became the NFCC chair, of which I became the first elected full-time. So that was a full-time job.
That was the first full-time one?
Yeah. But at the time when we started, I had 1.5 people helping me. But now NFCC...
Would that effectively meant you left at that point? Would you have left the fire service? Is that still part...
Well, I was seconded to start with, and then I took it on full-time as a full-time job. So
technically that was you retiring then? In a way? Because you were no longer part of...
Well, I was no longer...
You weren't Grey Book anymore?
No. Once that
so that was
on.
it. That was that bit of your pensioning and all that sort of stuff gone.
I was the only employee. So CFOA remained as a charity. I was the only employee of that charity. So.
How did that feel? Was there any?
It felt fine.
Because it's a very different chapter of life, you know. Yeah, there's some things I look at outside of the emergency services and they really excite me, but I'm like, oh, but once I've gone, I've gone. You know,
yeah, but
I was very young to go.
Still heavily involved in. Yeah. So I was talking to ministers, helped set up the Fire Standards Board, set up the projects, talking, chairing Chiefs Council, talking to Chief Fire Officers. It was, and trying to establish NFCC as an organisation at the same time. Now it's an established organisation that gets a few £1 million a year from Home Office to do a lot. But it is the only, apart from Fire Standards Board to an extent, it's the only national institution for the fire service. You've got national organisations like the unions and other things, but it's the only institution that's developing policies and guidance and running projects and things.
It's strange that there's only that. I wanted to, because I was just looking at my notes there. I didn't want to skip over Japan, because you were the strategic lead for the earthquake stuff that happened in Japan. That was 2011, wasn't it?
Yes.
Where did that fall within your roles and responsibilities? Because that was a very different thing than probably anything you'd done in your career before that.
Yeah, so it came from ISAR, the International Search and Rescue, which was part of the Operations Committee. And previous to that, when...
Was it ISAR by then? Or was it still... UKSAR.
Yeah, it's UKSAR really, but
it was then, because I'm a member of ISAR now, right. But it's come through several iterations before it's reached where it is.
So we used to have Mick Thomas, who used to be chief in Lincolnshire, a couple of other chiefs used to be the strategic lead in terms of UKSAR, ISAR, International Rescue, and they both retired, and we didn't have one. And the pool came in for Japan, and it was all sorts of things. And I said, well, why don't I go as well for the strategic leadership, for the linking into the embassies, linking into the local emergency departments, linking into all sorts of things. And everyone turned around and said, well, that sounds like a sensible idea. As well as having the tactical commanders on the ground, if you're part of it, you know how it works, the base of operations and everything else.
What light can you shine on the benefits of us doing it back then? Because now it seems very evident. Obviously, the UK does a lot of support to lots of things. Ukraine's a great example at the moment. We obviously have a skill set. We obviously have a different ability in terms of we're a more affluent nation, so our equipment and our skill sets and our training is different and better to an extent, with the greatest respect. But how much of an appetite was there then, or is there now, for us to continue to do things? Because I know ISAR now sits in a strange world within national resilience, and how much of its future is going to be what it's going to be. Can you shine any light on that? Do you have any knowledge of where that sits in the world now, and if we are still actively looking to support other nations with that sort of stuff?
The short answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think it sometimes will depend on politics. Yeah. Is this a nation we want to help influence?
Can we be seen to be helping these people?
Strange enough, there's been a connection between Japan and Britain for a long, long time. Both island nations, both international trade partners, all those sorts of things. So I think immediately that happened in. Because I can remember, I was actually getting ready to work, and the news was on. And you saw the first pictures at breakfast news, and I'd actually told my wife, I said, I think we'll be going to Japan soon. So,
what did you think when you got there? What was it like? What was your role when you were there?
Because... It was, So obviously it was winter, so it was really cold. It snowed a lot. I can remember that. The devastation was unbelievable. Town after town, district after district of collapsed buildings and mess. But the Japanese people themselves was so grateful to see, because we joined up with two USA ISAR teams. So. Okay. Fairfax, Virginia and LA County and us, we joined up at American Air Force Base in the north and trucked down for 200 miles into the main area. And the Japanese people were waving and giving food and all. They're really grateful that people would come to help. But learning things about their culture, if you discovered a body, how to lay the body out, where to put the shoes, all those sorts of things. Dealing with local emergency planners, splitting. So I've still got loads of pictures and presentations. Split up our search area between LA County, Fairfax, Virginia, us, and a small 12-person Chinese team that joined us as well.
That's what I mean, though, because none of these teams were great and well skilled and stuff like that, but your ability, how much ability you had to truly make a dent in what must have just seemed like an overwhelming. I mean, we've alluded to like challenges and restructuring London and stuff like that, but this must have just been on a whole nother level. And also, you're not in your own country, so you're not familiar with all of the strategic links between different services and how it works and whose permissions and things like that.
So we had a liaison lead. It's someone from the Department of Agriculture, but because they could speak English, became our translator, our link.
Or whatever,
So some of the local emergency services were still in existence, so we'd quadrant things up and search different areas. A lot of it was about public reassurance. It's the same as an event happens. If you have another terrorist attack here, you'll see lots of police officers in high-vis jackets on the streets because it's public. So there's public reassurance. There was recovering bodies for burial. There was there's one time it was a little old lady who was going to launch herself over this rubble. She'd seen her daughter washed away by the tsunami just after they'd put all their personal possessions in a temple on this hill, and she was going, and we managed to find that for her, all her family photographs, all her personal possessions she'd hidden in the temple. So little things like that always assist. But one of the main stories of that is we lost communications with the UK for 3 days. There was no comms, and in that time Fukushima blew up, didn't it? When we were in the air, we didn't.
Oh God, yeah.
It blew. And when we got we were coming back on a coach after a day's searching, and everyone's phone started to beep, and we got signals back. And so I rang home, and my first words, my wife says, "You've got to get out. You've got to get out. It's a disaster." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The nuclear disaster that's happened. We was 80 kilometres north of Fukushima,
which actually isn't very far in the grand scheme of
not
things.
when it's snowing."
No.
But we all wore dosimeters and all sorts of things like that. So only a firefighter came and says one morning, said, "Oh, my dosimeter's on, it's gone up. It's gone up by 0.1 of a rad or something." We said, "Yeah, it does that. Because there's always natural radiation in the background.
I always get microsieverts, millisieverts. When it makes a noise, start going the other direction. Don't go any further towards the thing.
But our luggage set off the radiation detectors at Manchester Airport when we came back.
Oh wow. What did you take away from that? When you came back, having seen such devastation on such a large scale, did it change the way you look at things? Did it change your perspective at all?
Well, only in so much. Where would you start to recover? Where would you? What end of this town do you start to recover, clear, rebuild?
Yeah.
So I was invited back to the Japanese embassy a couple of times to see their rebuilding plans, and so they'd moved the railway line, rebuilding the cities behind a railway line, and the railway line was built on a bank as a protection to the tsunami now. Wow. So they changed the whole setup of the towns along the coast. So to put the railway right, and billions of yen being pumped into it.
Yeah.
But I got to meet the Emperor of Japan, you see, after that. So when he was over for the Queen's probably Diamond Jubilee at the time, the lunch 2013.
Yeah.
So I was introduced to the Emperor of Japan at the Japanese embassy.
You've got an OBE, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. You've been twice. Did you get something else as well?
I've got a QFSM as well.
What did you get that for? Just services.
Being a jolly good egg.
Being a good egg, doing lots of good
Getting
stuff
old,
over a period
Getting
of time.
old and surviving.
That must have felt quite surreal.
Yeah, well, it's fun. So when I got the OBE, it was after Buncefield, and the Queen was still giving out the medals and things there. So you go to the Queen. People usually get about 20 to 30 seconds with the Queen.
Okay.
I got what felt like about 10 minutes. It's probably short, about 5, because she'd flown through the smoke plume in her jet. And she's talking about the smoke in Buncefield, and she holds your hand as she's talking to you. And I could feel all these people in the audience thinking, why is he getting so long? Why is he talking to her so much? Because she was chatting about Buncefield and the smoke.
I mean, it's on our list to do as one of the incident debriefs, but for anybody that is unfamiliar, could you just give us the highlights of Buncefield and the sort of takeaways from it? I know it's hard to do in a short...
in a short time. So Buncefield, 2005, 6 minutes on the 2nd of December 2005. It's an oil depot storage. So the refinery in the northeast of England...
Is it a coma site? Isn't it one of those?
Yeah, it's a coma site. It's one of those things, you go to Hertfordshire, welcome to Hertfordshire, have you heard about Buncefield? Yeah, that's the thing. So they were pumping unleaded petrol from the northeast down into the storage depot. 300 tonnes is supposed to be. So by 12 o'clock at night, the storage tank they were pumping it into was full. They kept pumping because none of the alarms, high-level alarms, electrical alarms, all cut off. Kept pumping for another 6 hours, tons of petroleum, and it turned into a mist until it found a ignition source, went bang, and 20 tanks blew at the same time. Eventually turned to 22, but we stopped it at 22. All our training for Buncefield had been for 1 or 2 tanks a night. It was never going to be worse than that. So we dealt with 22.
Wow, because I remember seeing the photos and everything like that. Could be seen for many tens of hundreds.
I'll tell you my old joke about that. I've told so many times, so many people heard it. But it's a true, as well as been a joke. So central London was like midnight at midday, absolutely pitch black. And Sunday mornings I used to take my two sons to rugby training, and obviously I couldn't go because I was up in Buncefield. Wife took them there. Parents knew what I do for a living. Said, "Well, how's Roy getting on?" Apparently, he looked to the sky and said, "Not very well by the look of it."
Needs to pull his finger out.
Yeah,
he's not fixed it yet.
No, yeah.
Kids just have a glance out the window. No, he's not on his way home yet.
He's not. Yeah, he's not put it out yet.
Talking about massive incidents, there. Obviously, we're still in the thralls of post Grenfell. I think not part 2, not like it's a film. Stage 2 or whatever, the investigation will come out at the end of this year.
Yes.
But were you asked or were you nominated? You were part of the expert panel to try and effectively go through it and assist in the investigation. What can you tell us about that? How was that like as an experience? Because it's, you've been out of London for quite some time since then, but...
Yeah. So Grenfell, I was actually alerted to it happening by Dan Stevens, who was Chief of Merseyside at the time, led National Resilience. He got the first indication. He rang me. I rang Danny Cotton about 3 a.m, got to speak to her about 4:30, and about what was going on, help. I was immediately called into meetings with the fire. So the fire minister at the time was Nick Hurd. It was his first day in the job, on the 14th. And the housing minister, Alok Sharma, who ran COP, chaired COP this year, he was housing minister, his first day in the job as well. So I went down and had a meeting with them, talked about, it's before it turned into Cobra. So I attended 12 Cobras with the Prime Minister, Theresa May and everyone at the time. Talked about all the operational technical things, and through that, about a week in, government had decided to set up an expert panel, and I was asked to join that expert panel to give the fire service advice, view of what has happened, what was going on, what we could do in future. So I went through that whole process, and I can remember going in that first couple of days, and one of the first things someone said to me is that stuff, that ACM, the aluminium composite panels, doesn't comply with building regulations. First day is, what was it doing there? I hope we haven't got any more of these, and it turned out we've got hundreds more than thousands more. And there's, and this was always a thing, and I think, the phase 1 of Grenfell said it didn't comply with building regulations, which is done. There's still people will argue under 12.7 of ADB B4 that you can interpret it because of class 0 that it did comply. It didn't ever comply.
No, it's. I know we're going to speak to Danny at some point because I spoke to her a few times. Some of what she's going through must be horrific. Can you try and put your mind into what would you be thinking about after something like that? And I'm not asking you to cast judgment on the actions that were taken on the day or anything like that, but this is the sort of thing that's going to go on for years, I would imagine, the investigation of something like that. Do you envisage it finishing anytime soon? Because how much attention has been given to the fire service when, like we've said, a lot of what has come to light had already been made aware of the issues.
People had been made aware. People had not told the truth, from manufacturers all the way through. People missold things. People, it's a whole. The trouble is, I think I was because I can remember similar fires happening in Dubai and places, but under the impression our building regulations would stop something like that happening in this country. Perhaps we should have asked more questions at the time. But perhaps we should all done. But I go back to the whole thing. We didn't have a fire research establishment anymore. We didn't, BRE become a arm's length company. It was all, nothing was really joining that, learning together.
Things had started falling through the gaps, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Bring us forward to where we're sat today. So HMI,
yes.
You, as we alluded to earlier, you came in, your predecessor was Zoe, coming into this role, effectively looking to carry out the first of its kind, assessing UK Fire and Rescue Services on a number of different aspects, for want of a better description. What did you think about coming into the role, and what did you think about how this was going to look in terms of what we were going to assess people on, and how we were going to quantify what we did and how well we did it effectively.
Well, the fortunate thing was I was quite close to Zoe as chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council as development of inspecting fire and rescue services. So I knew, the judgment criteria, what was being used. I was used as a critical reader for reports, and so I knew quite a lot of how it was being developed. Role is a fantastic role. When Zoe said she was leaving, my first thought was, I wouldn't mind doing that job.
Snap your hand off on it, try and get it. Again, for your listeners, people realise I also inspect police forces. Yes.
Yeah. So,
your team doing.
A lot of the team do the work, but I decide on the judgments and gradings for following the evidence presented. I'm also the senior responsible officer for the whole fire inspection portfolio, and I'm the HMI QFSM lead for domestic abuse. So I do a lot of work in that area as well.
You said we assess the fire, and of course your team and the organisation assess the police. How come the rankings or the metrics are slightly different in terms of...
that will change soon.
Okay.
That will change soon.
So has that just been a learning from
this? It's a learning thing, but and I've been involved in a few of these conversations where people say, well, they're not really good, but they're not really requires improvement either, or they're not really requires improvement, but they're not really good. So having that 5th grade does help.
Yeah. So for people that are unaware, it was inadequate, requires improvement, adequate, good, and outstanding for the police.
Yeah.
Is that what we're looking to move to for everybody?
Yes.
Because, like you say, if you're falling into one bucket or the other, it can't always be fair necessarily for people.
No.
We've seen some massive different spectrums in how people have been in the gradings that people have achieved. But we've also seen some huge improvements. What have been some of the services from the first rounds to the second rounds? Obviously, we're picking people out here, but what have been some of the success stories, and how do you think they've gone about doing it? Because some have made some significant improvements off the back of some advice and feedback.
I think I'd rather not go into different services because comparing services is difficult. But I think those people who have taken the report seriously, have looked at the areas for improvement, have looked at any causes for concern, and even read the report in the narrative, you'll still get things where you can improve. Those people who have used that as their base for improvement plans have really started to improve. Those who haven't paid so much attention to AFI's areas for improvement or causes of concern even, and I'm saying this for effect, but there's even been a couple of chiefs who thought, blimey, you have come back to look again. Didn't really think they'd be coming back.
Going to be a thing, they thought it was going to be a flash in the pan.
They didn't really say that, but that's the impression I got. That, oh, you've come back. Oh, right.
So they've had a wake-up call now, is the hope.
Yeah, but I think before we started recording off air, I said the inspectorate is not only about looking and grading areas, but looking for improvement as well, to help improvement. It's not just about marking things anymore, pointing at things. We do that, but it's also about, why don't you go and look at that service or that force?
They're doing that.
They're doing that quite well, and we want to support improvement events with NFCC and the LGA and others to help people improve, because the first thing in our own strategy is about adding public value, which is about improving policing and services for all our communities and the public. So it's about improvement.
In total transparency, I did speak to a number of chiefs before I sat down with you. They said, is there anything you think would be beneficial to speak to Roy about? And one in particular mentioned about diversity and inclusion, and trying to create environments that are more appealing.
Yes.
Not that they're not more welcoming, but they're certainly more appealing. And this individual gave a great analogy of, I'm sure I will misquote it now, but effectively the nursing sector as an example, where they've tried for over 30 years to improve having more men in the profession, and have had a very marginal little improvement. I think they tried to give that as an example of, look, despite all of these positive actions, despite all of this, I kind of feel now it's harder than ever to get people interested sometimes in the emergency services. That's kind of the creation of the podcast. But how do you feel about our ability? Is that a slopey shoulder thing? Do you think we're not trying innovative enough ways to do it? How realistic do you think it is that we're ever going to achieve a fully welcoming emergency services, but that actually does replicate the percentages of populations that we see in our communities? Is that ever going to be happening, do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure we'd ever actually get, and it's not 50-50, is it? I think women in the UK is 51% and men are 49%. So I'm not sure we'll ever get to that. But a lot of services done some really good things with women joining. It's just before I took on this job, for the first time ever, the percentage of women had increased in fire services because more women had joined, not because white men were retiring.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. So I think there is more.
Somebody
scope
did say
there.
that actually, and we were in the fire service. They said, "Look, everything we've been doing for the last 15 years, it's not been irrelevant, but we've never had so many people leaving as we've had now. Not because they don't like the job, but they're just actually coming up to retirement. We're going through that unit, and they said, like, now is the time.
Yes.
To really not stop and go, oh, it's not working, to actually lean in harder, because I personally believe in the next 5 to 10 years we will see the fruits of that labour." Does that make sense?
Yeah, but not everyone. Yeah, not everyone wants to. I think the fire service is still a well-kept secret about all this positive action we're doing. The opportunities it's given me. A boy from North London Comprehensive. The opportunities I've had and the things I've done and things I've seen. It's just I sometimes sit there and think, how did that happen? Where did that?
Every time I sit down with guests, I'm like, how does nobody else know that people in the emergency services do this?
Yeah, and the opportunities it gives people. So I think it's a well-kept secret. I also think, unfortunately, we still find some poor culture in but not as.
I heard that in your report. It was something that I noted down when I heard you speaking about culture and things like that. Where do you think we are with culture in the?
Well, I think it's improving. I think values are improving in places, but there are pockets in some services where it's still poor, and there's a couple of services this time round where the culture is just not good enough in the whole service. So,
do you think there's any reflection in that, and we probably won't know unless we drill down into the detail of that aspect? Because I feel like that was the case, but then I jumped back to this idea, to the fact of the number of people leaving. So if we just used a really local watch-based analogy, whereby more and more new people are joining the watch, so the begrudging old traditionalists, and I try and say that with negative connotation in this example, who have those certain entrenched beliefs, will soon become the outlier, will soon become the quieter voice.
But you must have met probations the same as I.
You've got to be careful that bleeding over.
Well, I used to go and visit fire stations as a chief fire officer and talk to someone and think, oh, blimey, they must have been in for 20 years. And you find out they've been in for 12 months. They've just absorbed everything that everyone else has told them.
And that's why I always talk about that value of association. You've got to be careful. Those opinions are, are like contagious. Would you want someone catching yours? Do you know what I mean? It's bleeding into your mind just because you're around somebody that has that.
Absolutely.
Has
but
that
there's even there's still the leaders I talk to now will still say things like a certain minoritized group don't want to join the fire service because they all want to be lawyers or they all want to be you still have that. You stop saying things like that. And then they put the Pakistani, the Bangladeshi, the Sri Lankan and Indian communities all into the same bucket. Oh, they don't. They all want to. And stop saying that. It's just it's.
I don't think that's the case as much as it used to be, especially with things like social media, because I think those communities that used to live on the fringes are now very much part of our culture, part of our communities. So there's not that complete unawareness, and they do have variety, ambitions, not solely the expectations of their parents, which is, I think, where that comes from, what you're alluding to there. People used to say, oh, they want their children to become doctors and this and that. Well, actually, their children are going to do whatever they want to do now. They're not necessarily just going to listen to their mum and dad and go off into those professions.
Yeah, so I think we just need to keep giving the message, need to keep trying hard, need to keep on positive action. I mean, again, went to a fire service, and I won't name the service now, but it's in the report I'm just writing. A watch manager refused to take part in positive action work because he didn't agree with it.
That's a shame.
Yeah. So there are still pockets like
That's
that.
a very difficult answer for that service to give, I would imagine. Can you tell me why this was and what you did about it? What education are you going to give?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about on-call or retained or however different people term it. I was on call for 10 years. I don't do it anymore because my life has changed since then. But how do you see this still existing in UK Fire and Rescue Service? Because some services are heavily reliant on it. Some, it's more than 50% of their workforce. It doesn't seem it's ever really been tremendously financially rewarding. I think a lot of people did it because they felt it was a great thing to be part of their community. But I worry for how people are going to continue to recruit people in on-call positions. If we're struggling from a whole-time perspective, which is not everywhere, but some places are, on-call or retained, places are really struggling. Do you see that continuing to be a thing? Do you want it? What's your opinion on it?
I think it's it's a very, very valuable part of the fire and rescue service, but it's also a very difficult part to resource Monday to Friday office hours.
Yeah,
that's I found in Hertfordshire, and we had 20 retained pumps, on-call pumps. Monday to Friday, I could have 15 unavailable, but I would still have 30 people available to do. So you need to start thinking differently about how you use those 30 people. You need to start, the way we pay people, and it has to be, I wanted in Hertfordshire to pay for 25% time because people were happy to do a 25% to cover. But no, you had to pay 75% because of grey book. So it's that restrictive stuff as well. We need to be much more flexible, look at a better way of providing this, and look at different ways of providing the service.
I mean, some of that, and we're not going to get into it, but some of that is a unionisation thing. Sometimes that's a barrier to us making innovations and things in our services. Is there any? Is it simply this is the way we've always done it, or is there any legitimate barriers that somebody like me wouldn't be aware of that would stop services employing on-call however they want, really?
I would term it barriers. Whether they're legitimate or not is another matter.
Okay. So they have relative freedom. I don't know if there's anything.
Well, no, there will be. You'll immediately get into a discussion argument about paying conditions and grey book, and the grey book says you have to pay this much, and and this is the shift pattern you have to have, and that it becomes a barrier.
I think unions in various capacities have done some wonderful things for our services, and I'm a member of a union. But sometimes I wonder what the future of different unions will look like, because sometimes I don't think it's always in their best interest. Because I speak to a lot of firefighters that question that, and they want to see either like things like 24-hour shifts and day crewing stations on different services is a very, some people really want it, and they can't always understand why their union, and it might be there's a couple of different unions out there, are standing in the way of it. It's probably not something you feel like you can comment on, but I feel like that.
But I've got a comment.
Go on.
A couple of things. First of all, unions are good. I'm still a member of a union. I sometimes wonder why I am now as a HMI, but I still pay union dues. Do I really need to be a member of a union now? But I am.
It's in case you get asked, people go, "Oh no, I am still a member of a union."
I'm still a member of a union. But the other thing I would say to that, and I've said to people, people who in Hertfordshire who really loved Day Career Plus, I said, you are the union.
Yeah.
Stop complaining about the union. You are the union. You change things if you want them to change.
Yeah, it's there for the people, by the people, and all that sort of stuff. I wanted to ask you about service liaison leads. Mm-hmm. So I've spoken to a few services where there was one thing actually. So obviously when these inspections started coming about, services had to they had to find room in their budget because it was a requirement that they had a service liaison lead. Oh no, what's theirs called?
There's officer, I think, SLO.
SLO, Service Liaison Officer.
Yeah, liaison officer.
Their specific role was to facilitate and keep the fluid lines of communications to make it as easy as possible. Some of the frustrations I've heard from those individuals is that it is, at the minute, it seems historically hard to have consistency from service liaison leads from the HMI's perspective, because they're getting given a new lead and it's only a few weeks away from an inspection, and they're like, this isn't fair, this person doesn't do anything about it, they're not really engaging with me. Is it difficult to source service liaison? How do they work? Are they seconded, or are they? Is it proper role? Is it a real role for them? Not a real role.
It's a real full-time role. So most service liaison leads are on secondment from fire and rescue services. So if we haven't got enough service liaison leads, they can only come from fire and rescue services.
Can anybody do it? Do you have to be a certain rank?
No,
experience?
Well, you need to have the skills and experience, and that might come with rank, but you don't have to be be necessarily. There are people from other parts of fire and rescue services background,
books and stuff like that.
With false liaison leads with policing, there's a lot more people who've come to the end of their policing career are now civil servants who do that.
Okay.
Fire so far has tried to do people mid-career a lot more, so you get more currency, the flow of currency.
Yep.
Trouble is with good mid-career people is they get promoted and they get pulled back to the service or back to another service, so they go fairly quickly. And that's a compliment to them and HMI QFSM because people see the benefit. But
they come and get development. It must be a headache for you. Though,
it makes that it makes that ongoing liaison difficult.
Yeah.
But it's not. But the inspection is not just about the SOL. You get a whole team come in, and you get question leads, and you get moderation. You get me and the other HMIs. So it's a whole thing. It's just that I understand the frustration with the SOLs, and we are aware, and we're trying to think how can we do that better without losing currency. So it is something we're thinking.
Is there any correlation between time periods that people are there and the types of?
No, because I think the person who probably, and we won't name names, the person who said that most to you, their report's going to be fairly good.
Okay, so that'll blow a hole in the theory.
Yeah.
So there's a larger team, even though the SOL is the opposite.
Yeah, although that's the tip of the spear or whatever you want to call it. There's the SOL. There's a whole team behind them that does the work.
Given where all this is sort of moving, we're having these reviews, we're giving this feedback, we're trying to develop. How do you see the future of UK Fire and Rescue Service working? We're seeing a lot of, like you saw earlier in your career, where police and fire are sharing resources, sharing facilities. How do you think the fire service is going to look in the next 5 to 10 years? What role is it going to play in our community? Who's it going to belong to? Who's going to govern it? How do you see it sitting? Is it going to change?
Well, I hope it will become more flexible, more responsive to risk, more adaptable. Use the capacity and professionalism of the firefighters to help our communities wherever the risk stands, whether that's another pandemic or something else. That's what I hope. I think there's going to be some big questions about number of fire and rescue services as money gets tighter, and sustainability. I think there's questions about development of people to lead services, and that's part of the white paper. Those sorts of questions. So I think the fire and rescue service has more and more value to add to communities, and that to be recognised. That's where I hope it goes.
I think we have the ability to. I always think it's like a buffet. We need to choose how we want to help. Mm-hmm. We can't keep saying, "Well, I don't want to do that." Okay, what do you want to do then? Because you can't keep just going to fires because there's not many of them anymore. So what do you want to do? Otherwise, we're going to tell you what you're doing.
Yeah, and it can't just be the latest chief's good idea. Let's do X because it's a good idea. It needs to be based on risk and analysis and serving
the need
communities.
Of the community, not just what you want to do.
So which is fine. But my fear is things will remain rigid. Things won't change. There'll be years of negotiation, and nothing really will change. And
then change will get forced upon people, though, won't it?
Well,
at some point, you can only play that game for so long until somebody goes, "You've had your chance. Now I'm going to tell you what's happening."
Yeah, and I hope so. I think the one thing about Lord Greenhouse as the Fire Minister and that is that he's been there for a couple of years. He's been pushing this people professionalism governance agenda for a while, and he's been but it's taken him a lot of staying power to do that. My fear is always the fire and rescue service sometimes isn't a big enough prize to keep the reform going.
Do you think the UK taxpayer gets value for money from its fire service?
I think in the main, yes. I think in the main, the fire service is relatively, still just over £2 billion, but it's relatively small change for what is delivered.
I wanted to, almost selfishly, but I know a number of people will be listening in as well, talk to you just briefly again about the way your career is shaped. And I know you said originally that it didn't have any sort of strategic flow to it, but looking back, sometimes I think it was like Steve Jobs said, it's always to connect the dots looking backwards. Mm-hmm. So looking backwards at your career now, and there will be lots of people, especially now as people are retiring and people are moving fast, I always have this concern that people get promoted into jobs that they're not quite ready for yet. What advice would you have to anyone that perhaps looks up to you, perhaps sees your career path and wants not the same, but maybe something similar and is looking to add more value or to progress? What advice would you give to somebody like that?
Thinking about this, the main bit of advice I gave someone once about career is stop playing three-dimensional chess with your career. Where's the next move going to be? Where should I position myself? And do a good job. If you do a good job in the job you are in, you will get opportunities and people will recognise it, and do your job to the best of your ability. And and you can still look for opportunities, but the people who try and map out their career, like the Star Trek three-dimensional chess, it often doesn't work. Just do a good job, look for opportunities, and treat everyone, no matter what level they are in the service, as a human being who's doing their best. And that's my philosophy for all, for everyone who works anywhere, is that everyone's doing the best of their ability in their job.
Yeah, I often say there's very few people that come to work with malice or trying to maliciously do a bad job. Everyone is trying, from their perspective, if you were sat where they were, they're probably doing the best they can with what they've got. But like you've said there, and I think I heard it said in a way that, be so good that people can't ignore you. Wherever you are, rather trying to play political chess and align yourself with the right thing or the right person, just be really good, because it's hard to ignore someone that is just churning through stuff and doing a great job.
And I think with me, throughout my career, people have known where I stand on things. I'm not clever enough to play games. I just you often know what I think.
In terms of running meetings and stuff like that, and it was only something that came up in my mind as I was finishing taking some notes, really. And it's something that in my role now, I'm finding more so in the last sort of 8 months. I don't think any meeting should be longer than like 5 or 10 minutes, and I just see people procrastinating. You find yourself going from meeting to meeting and getting nothing done with your days. I know it's something you alluded to earlier about being concise, but how do you work with your teams now? Because I feel very lucky to have an hour or so of your time now. Time is the one irredeemable asset. How do you stay efficient with your time when navigating all of these?
It's about being focused. It's being prepared and being focused. But you also need to be flexible. You need to give people time sometimes just to get things off their chest. So you need to be flexible. So just cutting someone off can make them feel bad after they've left the meeting. So it's a balance. Yeah, it's a real balance between letting people flow, but also getting the business done.
So know your audience as well.
Yeah, know your audience and be prepared. If you're prepared yourself, you know where you want the meeting to go.
Looking back, is there anything you wish you'd spent less time doing over your career? It sounded like quite early on you didn't want to fit in, so it wasn't like you were sitting around the watch table for too long, but is there anything that you look back and think, you know what, I entertained that for too long?
Not particularly, I don't think, because as you say, I moved. I was acted up after 3 years, and I was temporary LF after 3 years in service, and promoted after 5.5, and then sub officer, then in station officer in fire safety. So things were moving fairly quickly all the time.
So given all the people that you've led and in the leadership roles that you've been in as well, as a final finisher, sort of what are the great characteristics of the great leaders that you've worked with, or things that you like to replicate or try and do more of in leadership roles?
One of the leaders I always remember is a young assistant chief, John Anderson his name was, came into London. Where his career ended up is another matter, but he met me once and said hello. The next time he met me was I was a station commander ADO at the time. Next time he met me, he said, "Hello, Roy, how's things going?" I thought, he's remembered my name. That was a real trick. He made me feel good just by remembering my name. So that's what I'd say about thinking about other people, thinking from their point of view, having some empathy as well.
I always think, like you say, trying to, if you can, I always want, as soon as I leave speaking with somebody, I try and note something down, like if they've got children. And it's not a manipulation game, but it's just that significant piece of information about that person to show that, because you do sincerely care, but you're going to meet another 1,000 people that day. So what about this person am I going to remember? Okay, they've got a child, they've got this, they've got that. And it makes that person, like you say, feel acknowledged and feel recognised. Because we do like that.
Well, there was someone the other day, and I won't name them, but it happens to be a politician, and I said something about their hobby. They've got a hobby, and I said, "How's X going?" And the person said, "Well remembered." That's what they say.
Because they're a human as well. At the end of the day,
that's right.
I always say to people, you're more than just your job. Who you are is far more than just the thing you do.
Yes.
Roy, thank you for your time, brother. I really appreciate that.
No, thank you.
Take care. The Firefighters Podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.